Hey folks, in this interview, I'm speaking with Esther Mbabazi. We're going to be talking about a photo essay that she did about birth in rural Uganda. This is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Really, I know I say this all the time, but really interesting show for you guys today, an international show as it were. I'm speaking with Esther, and Esther Esther, you're a lot of stuff, but we talked before, before starting the interview, you are a photographer. This is why you're on This Week in Photo, but you did a fantastic photo essay that I want to grill you about and talk to you about. So first of all, welcome to This Week in Photo. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So first of all, let's start with a little background. So you are, even scheduling this interview, you are a world traveler. You're all over the place. You are born in Uganda, but you are now in Germany and running around the country or around the world actually taking photos. Tell us a little bit about the origins of Esther and how you came to be a photographer. Let's start there and then we'll dive deeper.
Well, I always was fascinated by stories. I loved stories in all forms. And when I was growing up, I didn't have so much access to books. And the first time I got to actually read a whole book by myself was in school during an English class. And I think since then I was really drawn to the ability of people to tell stories and transport you to a place you've never been, and that really inspired me to start looking into storytelling. And at first I wanted to be a journalist, a writer. So I tried that and it didn't really work out. I didn't feel like I was good at it. So I went to journalism school, hoping I would be able to learn more and actually find something that I really like doing. But it didn't really help. But in between searching for myself and doing journalism course, I came across a photography exhibition in Kampala, and this had works from all over Africa, but there was this photographer's work that stood out most to me. He was a young Ugandan photographer, and he had photographed this very famous part of the city, which I would usually pass when I'm going from school or going to visit relatives. And I never paid attention to it, but this image froze everything, and it was a black and white image. It was so emotional and vivid. And when I saw this image, I realized I really wanted to make photos. I realized that this is how I would tell stories.
And it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that we talk about a lot, just in general photographer conversations, is there seems to be a line between photographers that just like to take pictures and make pretty pictures or get compliments from others, either in person or social media, and people like yourself that like to tell stories and were inspired initially by the art of storytelling. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So starting from the art, from the side of you wanting to tell stories, where did you go from there? Did you, just look for more stories to tell, or was it more of an evolutionary path?
It actually took me a while so after seeing this photo exhibition, I reached out to the photographer. His name is Oscar Chibuka, and he started giving me lessons on and off. He would teach me how to set a camera. Actually, that was one of the most important things that I had at the beginning, because he taught me straight up to use the manual mode on the camera. And I had to practice with that, because at that time he was mostly photographing events and youth culture, hip hop and dance. And so I also started there. And I photographed, that actually helped me to learn to photograph fast moving action in really low light.
Yeah.
And I went from there. I shot more events like festivals and concerts, but I felt like I lacked something. I felt like I lacked the process of creating, having a story, being curious from the beginning and trying to learn more about the issue at hand while I'm also photographing it. So I started taking photography workshops anywhere where there was a storytelling workshop. I applied, and if anything was free to apply, I applied.
Yeah.
And I got through to some of those, and which led me to making this story in 2015, actually 2016. Yeah, and because this was also part of a workshop by the World Press Photo, and that is like I just kept going from there on.
Yeah, and I want to talk a lot about that the photo essay. I want to get there because that is amazing. And the article that the Photographer did on that, I think I was telling you before we started the interview, I actually read it 2 or 3 times because it was, impactful from the standpoint of just, understanding the things that are happening. So you as a photographer, I feel like you did your job, right? Of explaining and bringing me into the situation that was there, but also from a just a regular photographic standpoint, amazing images, and just sort of putting myself in your position and thinking, would I have been able to get that shot? And in a lot of cases, I was saying no, I would probably. So let's talk about. I want to segue into the photo essay. So the photo essay, it's a photo essay on birth in rural Uganda. So let's take me through that and how that came to be and why you felt compelled to do it.
So I was born and raised in Kampala, which is the main city of our small country, of our small, really overpopulated country. But I hadn't really had so much contact with the rural areas of the country. And one time I went to visit friends in the mountains, and they were working at a hospital. So I just hung around the hospital, getting to learn more about the area through the people and learning about what the hospital is doing. I was making some photos for them. But in that process, I got to learn about the traditional birth attendants. And before that, I didn't know that they still existed, because this was 2015, at the end of 2015. And it blew my mind to learn that there are still women out there in the villages helping other women with maternity care and antenatal, postnatal services for free. Like, it's deep in the villages. So when I learned about that, I wanted to know more about these women. Who are these women? But then digging deeper and researching, I realized there's been a lot of negative stories and media around it, because many of them also are not really certified to do it. They, someone in the neighborhood is having a baby, the only woman around it to have a baby. And there were many cases where either the mother or the baby died during the process. So those cases led the government to ban the practice of the traditional birth attendants. And so the more I dig deeper and read about this, the more I felt bad, because in the community, the women that we were meeting and talking with, they were really nice people, and they genuinely cared about the women that they're helping. So I wanted to explore a different angle. I wanted to see, who are these women, despite being banned by the government, are still practicing, but also incorporating the modern healthcare system into their work, because they know the dangers of what they're doing. They know they don't have enough equipment, but they still want to help and they care. So, so I looked into those. I met a few of them, but I was really drawn to Masa. I don't know, maybe it's because she was really old and sweet, and she had so much conversations to tell.
81 years old, right?
Yeah. She is quite a character, because I met her and I was talking to her. Of course, at 81, she was starting to forget things and make things up, but she would forget something, and when she remembers it 20 minutes later, she goes back to it just to make sure she gives you the right information or explains to you how it felt, how she got into that kind of work. And so I worked on this story also during that period where I was part of the Masterclass, the WordPress Photo Masterclass. And and then we went through a process of editing it afterwards.
Yeah. And so then the before you got to the process of editing and before you even sort of began the project, was there a period of sort of you getting to know Masa and the other women, and just sort of before you even picked up the camera, did you have a time where you just wanted to understand and internalize the story, or was it, I'm going to go in and be a fly on the wall and document this without interacting at all? What was that flow like?
So the most of the interactions that I had with Martha before photographing her were at the health center, because this health center, she would always come in with mothers and she would wait in line with them. They would go to see the doctor. She would be there with them. If a mother is having a baby, she would be there with them. So I just kind of watched her from the side. And at the same time, I was going into the communities and talking to other traditional birth attendants and getting their story, getting to know them, until one time that I actually got to interact with Masa, because one of the people at the health center was like, "This is our best one. She's doing great. She's bringing so many people to us. She stays with them. She's really dedicated, and she loves it." So I think that was the point that I decided to talk to her personally and get her story and also start photographing her. It actually didn't take me, I didn't spend so much time photographing her because this area is far out in the mountains, and I had to travel back and forth from the city. So I only went there and photographed her in 2 installments.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. So how do you feel like this particular story has changed you, or has it? Does it? So I know when in speaking with a lot of photojournalists and even street photographers, they'll say when they tackle a particularly sensitive topic, especially one that in turn, they can see themselves in, it changes them in some way. Have you felt that at all? Have you felt some sort of personal transformation throughout the process of creating this story?
Well, apart from being so scared of giving birth and
yeah.
and having so much respect for all the women out there who have actually managed to have babies and go through it, I feel like the other thing that really came to me during this process is mostly about my storytelling, because in the beginning I was like, I just want to see what her life is, but then I realized it's more than just her life, it's her environment, why she chose to do this, who are the women that she's working with, and in the end it touches more than just the story of Masa, but also the state of the healthcare system that we have out here, and how women are actually not having many options, and the few options, how are they trying to reach out to the broader community that is out in the mountains, for example. So for me, I think it really helped me to, in my other stories, to always have a starting point, but also know that that starting point is only a starting point. It to stay open-minded for all the other entries that can come into the story.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel the same way when I'm, like you and I were talking about before we started this interview, doing these sorts of interviews conversationally and just seeing where they lead is better than starting with an outline and trying to fill in the blanks, right? So
exactly,
it becomes much more real and more human. Esther, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about we talked about sort of the process and the human part of the story. Let's talk a little bit about the technical piece of it. And, back when you first saw that first photo and got excited about photography, what guided you to the gear choices that you use, the lenses, those sorts of things? Why do you shoot with the tools that you shoot with?
I don't know. I feel like in the beginning it was more like I practiced on a Canon camera. Then when I had to buy one, I bought a Canon camera. because those are a bit cheaper to get if they're used. And so I worked with that. I still do work with it, but along the way too, I learned, according to different situations, I learned that I needed a smaller camera. So that is when I got the Fujifilm camera. I got the Fujifilm X-T2, and I use it in different. I use both cameras in different situations because of different reasons for me. One of which the size. I really like the Fuji because of its small size. It's really lightweight and it's small, that when you go out in communities where you feel like you might face resistance with making images, if they see you with a small camera, especially out in Uganda, people only believe you're serious if you carry a huge camera.
Yeah.
So if I have a small camera and I have a mission, it really helps me a lot, because people just think I'm a tourist or something, and they don't pay much attention to me. And in that way, I end up getting really important images. And also because I could shoot with a silent shutter, so people can't really know if I've made the photo or not. And I find that really helpful sometimes. And I use the Fuji a lot now with my youth story, because they're working with youth. You have to work with, many times you find yourself in low light situations, and maybe you're going to a club, they won't let you in with a huge camera because they don't want their people to feel insecure. But then they'll let you in with a small camera because they just don't care about it, right? And I feel like that has helped a lot with my storytelling, to gain access to places that would otherwise take me so long to make people accept me in with a bigger camera.
Yeah, the smaller camera is like a passport, and I would say that it's not just Uganda, right? It is worldwide. That whole camera stigma of larger cameras must mean that you are a real photographer. A small camera means, you're just a tourist or
hobby photographer.
Yeah, exactly. You can't be real. It's just a little tiny camera. I found that all over the place, as well as the whole tripod stigma. I don't know if you have that as well, because if you're using a tripod, that must mean you're a professional photographer. Right? Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
So what about lenses? Do you find yourself gravitating to? I know some photographers will say, I shoot with this whatever sensor size they're on, the normal lens for that sensor size, and that's all I use, and I zoom with my feet. Or they'll have 3 or 4 lenses in the bag. What do you carry around with you on assignment?
So most times I carry a 35 fixed lens and a 50. And recently I got a 24 to 70, which like now sometimes I feel lazy to move around, and so I end up zooming a lot with that. But depending on when, I find myself using the 35 a lot. But also I've had a lot of people saying that my images are kind of at the same distance. So I'm trying to gravitate from that to use the other lenses more. That is why I got the 24-70. That way I can shoot at 24, I can shoot at 70, I can, have the variations. But with the Fuji, I shoot with the, I think it's called the 23. The 23, and I recently got a 50, which I really love. I really love the 50 for the portraits.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's
for the blurred, the blurred background on that 50, right?
Yeah, and and usually when I'm using it, I use the 23.
Lovely. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wrap up in just a second here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the process. Once so we started with, you got the idea from at the workshop, you moved in, you got or you moved forward with creating the story with and sort of learning the ins and outs and the scary parts of that whole process, and then you got to the culling part of it, where it was time to go through all the images that you shot and pick the ones that were going to go into the story. Tell me about how that worked. Was it, from a technical standpoint, were you culling in Lightroom, and then how did you pick the heroes and leave the ones that may have been your favorites, in the computer versus setting them free? What was that process like?
Well, because this was part of a workshop, we had a lot of help from different mentors, and that helped. Usually how I work is I edit out. I first get rid of the blurry images, which are not blurry, like intentionally. And then I go I tag them by a one, the ones that I like. And then from there, because I might have like 5 doubles of one scene or action. And then I look through those, I select 1 or 2, because sometimes I just can't get it down to 1.
Yeah.
And then I have those. So those are not really in a sequence of a story at that point. They're just images that I like, and I edit all of them. I put them aside, and then I start going through them. I look at them in Bridge, and I move them around and see which one works with which one works after which one. How do I want my story to flow? Which one do I go first? Do I have like a certain kind of image that is going to bridge together all the different images if I'm working on kind of different stories or characters? So I do that, and then I narrow it down to, let's say, 15. And then I usually ask people to look at them and select like 12 in
Like
the end.
people online or people around you in person?
People online most of the times. I have a few people that I can reach out to in this network of photography. I have mentors. I have past mentors. Because that's also the beauty with attending workshops or applying for grants and things like this, because you create a very huge community that, depending on what you're working on, there's always someone out there who can spare a minute to look at your work and tell you what they think.
Yeah.
And having the different, to see what people are drawn to, kind of helps me in the end to select, to go with an edit that I feel like I'm there, but also I know the audience will relate to. Sometimes, though, I feel like it's very hard in the end to select 12 images on a story that you've worked on, let's say, for 3 months. It's crazy. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's sometimes, even as I know, even when you're sort of writing a story versus photographing a story, and you let someone else read that work, they will pick out things that your brain just didn't see. Like you used "and" twice in that sentence, and you've read that sentence a million times, and you didn't see that typo in there. Same with photography. You may not have noticed that tree is growing out of that person's head, but you show it to people, and they're like, "Why the tree?" And then suddenly you see it, and you're like, "Why didn't I see that?" Right? So yeah, so just to bring it around full circle, what did Masa think of the final work, and has she seen it?
So when I was photographing her, she still didn't understand it. She still didn't understand why anyone would be interested in her life. And so after photographing and I shared images with her, I gave her some prints, and she loved the prints. She was so happy. She was hugging me and thanking me. But that's as much as she saw of the story. Because even when I was photographing her, I explained to her that this is a story I'm interested in. I don't know where it will end up because it's a personal story. You take on personal stories and you just don't know where they'll end up. But I explained to her why I'm really interested in it. And along the time, she got to feel comfortable with someone being interested in her life. Yeah. So when I showed her when I gave her prints in the end, she was really, really happy.
Wow. Yeah. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. So what's next for Esther Mbabazi? What's the next project or the current project that you're working on?
So I'm working on a long-term project about African youth, which sounds so general and big, but it's basically about exploring the youth of our times, because Africa right now is the youngest continent, and we're still going to be young for quite a while because of the population and the dynamics in the continent. But so I'm approaching this project in different chapters, and each chapter is touching on a different theme. And I'm trying to include as many different countries. So I started with Uganda, and I was photographing what it means to be a young person in the world. Because at that time, in 2017, when I started, Uganda was the youngest country in the world by age. So then I photographed coming of age amidst conflict in South Sudan. And then now I'm exploring the cultural integrations of African migrants to Europe.
Wow. See, important work. And one thing that we didn't talk about was your relationship with National Geographic. Because as you're talking through these things, I'm seeing National Geographic colors in my head. so that yellow is popping up. I'm hearing the music. So tell me, before we break this off, what's your relationship with National Geographic, and how did that come along?
Well, I'm a grantee, and National Geographic grantees are called explorers because they fund us to go out there and explore the world, explore stories, and be it a scientist, be it a biologist, in all different forms, or storytellers, filmmaker, illustrator, as long as you have something you'd like to explore and share with the world. And you manage to convince National Geographic, they'll support you. And that is how I'm connected with the National Geographic.
Wow, that's fantastic.
They're funding my project on the African youth migrants to Europe.
That is great. So the process is you have an idea, and you pitch it to National Geographic, and they approve it, and then from that point forward, you're just on the road taking photos. Do you have a deadline at the end of it where you say, hey, Nat Geo, I'll be done with this project by the end of July 2019, and I'll have a finished photo essay for you by that time? Or is it ongoing and you finish when you finish, depending on what life throws at you?
Well, for my grant, there's a deadline. So you apply with a project proposal. You tell them what story you would like to work on, and then you give them a timeline and you give them a budget. So if they approve, if they feel like it's something they can support, then they give you the grant, they give you the money, but then you have to create the body of work in the time frame that you talked about. And then from there, who knows, if all goes well, they publish it, and then if they really like it, you can ask for more money for another thing.
That is great. Well, congratulations on that. I think you're the first National Geographic Explorer that I've met. So it's an honor. That is really cool. Well, Esther, if people want to check out your work or see, any of the photo essays that you've worked on, or any of the other things that you've done, what's a good place for them to go check your stuff out at?
So I have a website, esthermbabazi.com, but I'm also really present on Instagram, and there people can stay more updated with what I'm working on, what has been published. And on Instagram, Esther Ruth Mbabazi.
Esther Ruth. Okay, we'll link to all that. I'm sure that's also in the photo story and all that. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
This has been a pleasure, chatting with you. It's always humbling for me to chat with photographers that are actually photographers, right? you're a real photographer out there doing important work, telling important stories, and using the gear beyond taking photos of things that don't necessarily matter to people. You're using the gear to take photos of things that are changing the world. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
All right, Esther, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. This is TWiP.